Whatever you guys want. It's a free-for-all today as we finish this study. But I thought this was just, there wasn't really any rhyme or reason except that I just found this to be interesting. I'd seen an article by Sam Rainer at churchanswers.com. And Sam Rainer is the son of Tom Rainer. And Tom Rainer founded Church Answers. And he had this article, Sam did, about the coming massive wave of retiring pastors and church staff. There is a huge retirement it's already here, but it's this basically tsunami of retiring pastors at a time when churches are already having a really difficult time. In the churches of Christ, and this probably can be, it probably can be replicated across all denominations, but the average time that people look for a minister is 3 years before they find one. That's minimum, 3 years. What's that? What's the average tenure? The average tenure is 3 years. So, yeah, so 3 years to look for a minister. You're lucky if, 3 years is the average. I don't think that's even the median. So I think if we factored in the median, you're probably looking at a median tenure of about 1.5 years-ish. And that's very, very typical. So if you have a minister for more than 3 years, you are in the top percentile of very bizarre church situations. It's very rare, very rare. So this is obviously, it's a big problem for the church. And we're going to talk about how this, what the implications are and how churches can tackle this issue. Sam, gives some pretty interesting cultural shifts in that blog, and I wanted to cover that too. But we're all familiar with this passage, right? Jesus is talking about the harvest, and it's very plentiful, but he's praying for laborers, right? Jesus, I'm going to read this, Matthew 9:35 through 38. And Jesus went throughout all the cities and villages, teaching in their synagogues and proclaiming the gospel of the kingdom, and healing every disease and every affliction. When he saw the crowds, he had compassion on them because they were harassed and helpless like sheep without a shepherd. Where do we hear that exact phraseology? Do you remember what Bible story we heard that exact phrase? It's literally verbatim that same expression. It was the feeding of the 5,000. When Jesus grabs his disciples, they row across the Sea of Galilee, and Jesus intentionally is looking for a desolate place. He said, let's find a desolate place so that you can find rest. They row across the Sea of Galilee, and the people ran ahead on foot, and they're waiting on the other side. As they row close to the shore, they see this literal sea of people, and the scriptures say that Jesus had compassion on them, for they were harassed and helpless like sheep without a shepherd. Same exact phrase. And of course, we know the story. What did Jesus do? He didn't turn around. That's what I would have done. I would have been like, heck with this, and I would have motored on out of there and found another place. But Jesus didn't do that. He rose toward the people, and he stands up. He begins preaching. He gets off the boat. He organizes people, and he begins preaching to the crowd of thousands of people. He did that for hours. And then, of course, the miraculous feeding happened after that. Can we turn that down just a little bit? There's this annoying, that's pretty good there. It's just a little too hot, and it's like, my voice is too manly. It's that low bass, getting reverb. So I think this is really powerful because Jesus sees these crowds of people, and we tend to get frustrated, right? We're like, or discouraged. right? One or the other. We get discouraged or we get frustrated and we're like, we see these massive crowds of people. Jesus sees the people and he sees a big problem, right? In the story of the feeding of the 5,000, there's a problem. There are people, they don't have the word, and they don't have food. It's an overwhelming problem, and he marches right into that problem, right? Here, he sees a problem. There are all these people everywhere, and what's the issue? They don't have people preaching to them. And he marches right into that problem. He has compassion on them. And then he said to his disciples, "The harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. Therefore pray earnestly to the Lord of the harvest to send out laborers into his harvest." All right, that's the solution. Prayer, and specifically prayer for workers. So how do we face this today? Well, we pray. And specifically, we pray for workers. Now, do you think that Jesus prayed and then twiddled his thumbs and that was the end of that? I don't. I see discipleship, to the core. And it's something that we're not good at, not just in the churches of Christ, but all over the place. We're not good at discipleship. We're not good at discipling people and shaping them into ministry. What did Paul do with Timothy? You remember how young Timothy was? He's probably around the age of 12, 13 years old. Paul grabs him, takes him on the mission trail. Let's go. Let's go preach. He discipled him, which is really cool. And then Timothy ends up being the preacher at Ephesus. Uh-oh. We lost connection somehow here. I'll do it this way. What's that? Yeah. I don't know why that's not working. Turn it off and back on again. There we go. It went to sleep. I talked this thing into sleep. That's impressive. When the remote goes to sleep, that's impressive. DP's still awake, though. I don't know what that says. So this wave of retiring pastors, right? There's this massive wave of pastoral retirements. It's not just coming soon, it's here upon us. Church leaders have to prepare for significant staff turnover. We have to be prepared for this. Many older pastors plan to retire within the next decade. So in the next 10 years, we're going to see another big shift. You remember what happened 5 years ago? What was the big world event 5 years ago? Almost 6. COVID, right? The national pandemic. It shifted our culture permanently, right? Not just in the church, but everywhere. We do things differently. We do everything differently, and we don't, I think if we don't realize how much shifted until we actually take some inventory and we're like, holy cow, all right, our live stream, there's one of many. DP and I were just talking about our live stream right before COVID. We were putting a tissue over top of a webcam on a laptop in between Bible class and worship. We would literally hang a tissue over the camera. That was not even 6 years ago. All right, everything shifted very differently. Church culture shifted differently. The numbers in churches shifted. Many churches went way down. We're half of what we were pre-COVID. Churches lost people and they didn't recover them everywhere. So a lot shifted, right? And a lot's shifting in the next 10 years. You're going to see a shift, and mark my words, you're going to see a radical shift in church culture. So we're going to talk about how we walk through that. Pastors and church leaders are significantly aging. The median age of pastors is 60 years old. That's the median age. The average age would be expected to be older. So the average age of ministers is probably upper 60s. The average age. The median age, that means median is 50% are younger than 60, and 50% are older than 60. Terry, what did you just tell me earlier about? Yep. And what about here? Who's the oldest one here? Almost. You're a close third. But Terry was saying, I wasn't that old when I came here a few years ago. You know? It happens quick, doesn't it? So this is happening all over the place, and at the same time, there's a small pipeline of younger pastors, ministers. He calls them pastors. But this small pipeline of younger ministers is creating this big challenge. And I talked about how my alma mater, Harding Grad School, was one of the biggest seminaries in the United States when I was there. I graduated in 2007. Harding was one of the biggest by number, as far as number of people they graduated. By the way, only one third of people who go into seminary actually graduate. So when you see the incoming number of like 50 people, and you're like, wow, that's 50 people who are going into ministry. No, 1/3 of those will graduate. Of that 1/3, many of those, probably about half, will exit ministry within 8 years in, and they'll never go back into ministry again. They get burned out. They have bad experiences. They get fired multiple times. It's the turnover rate. They get exhausted, and their families get exhausted from always moving. And you know, the kids halfway through a school year, that happens all the time. Ministers get fired, and then their kids have to uproot in the middle of the school year and move to a different state and find new friends. And ministers just say the pay's not, like, frankly, the pay's not worth it. So this is happening where the numbers are shrinking and shrinking. It's a small pipeline of younger ministers. The reliance on a steady flow of seminary graduates is ending. You know, the decreasing pipeline is creating a significant ministry gap. Churches need younger leaders, but this talent is increasingly rare. So it's like this compound issue. Retiring ministers often continue ministry in new fruitful roles. And so this idea that the church is going to keep people. What Brent said this before, like, ministers never really retire. Well, that's kind of true, but their roles shift. A lot of times they'll find other fruitful roles, and it's not in the pulpit, at least not full time. You know, they might go preach here and there for other people.
In my experience, what I've seen is full time, but it's not in a way like you're like what you are.
That's right. Yep. Yep, that's right. Yeah, so the interim, filling in for people inside. Like, I have a friend who, he's retired. Him and his wife live in an RV. They live in a motorhome. And he finds churches across the United States, like literally anywhere, that they're without a minister, and he's just their interim minister. And sometimes it's years until they find a full-time minister. So, yeah, the roles shift. Bivocational ministry is becoming the new norm. What's bivocational ministry? Anybody want to define? Are you brave enough to define this for me? Yeah, more than one occupation. So you have the ministry of preaching, and you have another part-time job typically. So bivocational is you're working for the purpose of eventually getting into full-time ministry, where you're full-time supported by the church. That's the goal of bivocational ministry. So bivocational, typically it's part-time secular work, part-time church work, and maybe the church doesn't have enough funds at the time or whatever, and so you're going to build a church and get to a point where you have the stability and the church can hire you full-time. That's bivocational. This is a direct response to fewer full-time churches. Co-vocational. Anybody know what co-vocation is. What? So you're doing full-time ministry at your full-time secular job. So typically, you're not paid by the church, or you're paid very little, and the goal is to not work full-time at the church. The goal is to be the church, to be ministering at your place of employment. And so you use that as say that you're a manager at, well, let's bring Chick-fil-A to Somerset, because we need to. Say that you're an owner. You're an entrepreneur, and you're like, I want to drop 10K. Not that I've ever thought about this, but I want to drop 10K and build a franchise, bring Chick-fil-A to Somerset, and I'm going to be an owner of that Chick-fil-A. And I have all these employees now. And you're at that job full time, but you're also ministering to those people. And not only bringing those people into the church, that's not the only goal. The goal is to kind of assimilate the church into the workplace and to make disciples at your full-time place of employment so that those people can go out and they can minister to other people. And it's actually quite effective. And this is the cultural shift that's happening right now. And so you hear me talk a lot about the house churches. This is co-vocational ministry. I have so many friends. I have like two or three friends off the top of my head that I can think of that are doing house churches, and they're doing them exceptionally well. They have full-time secular jobs, but they have church, worship at their house, and they're splitting at the seams. And they're wildly successful. And those churches become church planting churches. And a lot of times it's because of necessity. You outgrow your house. And so the first thought isn't, my goodness, we need to build a church building because we're outgrowing this. We need more space. The idea is you guys need to go, some of you need to go and start doing this in your own homes. This is the model for the church here in America. This is the shift that you're going to see that will completely take over our culture in America. These kinds of churches are closing at unprecedented rates. They're closing their doors at unprecedented rates. And it's happening because that model of paying the full-time minister, when you don't have full-time ministers, there's no pool of people to find. A lot of them are closing out of necessity. So Jesus is praying for the workers, but he's not dictating what that looks like, right? Jesus isn't like, all right, we're going to pray for workers, and what we need is we need more seminaries that are going to train people to go into ministry. We need more church buildings. We need all these big funds to fund these buildings to go up all over Israel, throughout Jerusalem and Judea and, all these surrounding areas. That's not his model. What's his model? I'm doing it backwards too, but big question mark. There is no model. He's the model. And he leaves it wide open for people. And you see a bunch of different models in the New Testament, right? Like we've talked about being the pattern, the blueprint of the New Testament church. What does that mean? I don't even know what that means. Like I took multiple restoration classes, and we talked about the history of the churches of Christ, and we talk about this blueprint of the church that we find in the Bible. And so we talked about that, and we're like, what does that even mean? Right? A lot of people interpreted that as, 2 songs and a prayer and 2 songs and announcements and right? They're like, this is the model that you find in the New Testament. And they put it inside of a box. But as you read the New Testament, you find that there was wild freedom. You had house churches, you had people meeting in synagogues, you had Paul preaching in the lecture hall of the tyrant. Paul literally preached wherever he could. When he was in Philippi, he preaches to a group of women, and like maybe 5 of, like we estimate somewhere around 5 maybe, at a place of prayer by a little creek in Philippi. That's how the church in Philippi began. There was no synagogue. There was no, there was no flair. There were no big donors and supporters. Paul was whipped, him and Silas, they were whipped and put in prison. And then Paul was chased out of Philippi. He was literally there for a few minutes, a few days max. That's how, so significant was the church in Philippi that we have a letter to the Philippians. So it's very different, right? Very different models, but it's this flexibility. The marketplace role is to keep leaders connected and prevent mission creep. What's mission creep? Anybody? I need to stop talking and let people preach. Who's going to preach? Here we go. I knew we'd get a commenter.
I wasn't commenting on that, but I think his model was pray for it and then go find it. Like, he wasn't necessarily saying, okay, you were mentioning he didn't pray for it and then sit and twiddle his thumbs. He said pray for workers, and then he went out and find the people to make into those workers.
Yeah.
And create them and then send them out to find more that they were to create and find more.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, but it's like this big question mark. Like, what is the model? We don't really know. I mean, we kind of have a model, but the model is discipleship. Go and disciple other people, right? Teach them my commandments. That's the model. And you look at, was it at Acts chapter, my memory is getting so bad now. My brain is leaving me really quickly. But it's Acts, what is it, Acts chapter 6, or is it 8? Where you have the feeding of the widows. Up to that point, people were added to the church daily, added, and then you get this food distribution problem, which was a big problem, discrimination and things like that. And they come back to the preaching ministers, and they're like, hey, we need your help. Their answer was no. It wasn't like a maybe. We'll think about it. We'll pray about it. It was an instant and a very definitive absolutely not. It would not be right for us to neglect the ministry of preaching and teaching the word in order to wait on tables. It wouldn't be right for us to help you hand out food. Our ministry is the preaching of the gospel. We don't do that anymore. 80% of church membership is held in churches of about like maximum 100 or less. What are some of the roles of ministers in churches 100 or less? Survival. Yeah. I feel that this month. It's been a tough month. But it's a lot of small churches. It's janitor. It's paperwork, it's phone calls, secretary, visitation, the work of shepherds. It's like on and on and on those roles go. And that wasn't the model in the New Testament. The New Testament, they're like, no, our job is to preach. That's it. And so you guys select people. And what's interesting is when that happened, that delegation happened, Luke's language shifts, and he says the church multiplied greatly. The very next verses after they figured out they sorted this food distribution problem, they delegated people. The church, Luke stops using addition, and he says the church it exploded. It was everywhere. And that's because the people who the people who were preaching were able to preach because it was limited in the New Testament as well. Like, this was a big issue. And so more people were able to hear the word, and they were discipling people to be preachers, and the word was getting out. So, yeah, this model is really interesting. Paul was a tent maker, right? Paul was not a full-time, he wasn't a paid preacher. Paul preached, but Paul certainly wasn't a paid preacher. So he was a co-vocational minister. Paul was a full-time tent maker. And very little is talked about that in the New Testament, so we don't know like what that looked like, but he had a full-time business. Making tents, that's how he made his money. That's how he supported himself. But he also preached a lot. So interim pastor, ministry, whatever you want to call it, preaching opportunity, this is what Brent was talking about. Seasoned leaders can fill this gap in open pulpits. Intentional interim ministry, preaching for somebody, all these people who are retiring, my guess is that the majority of them are going to preach and fill in this role. So this buys us a little bit of time, but that's all it's doing. It's buying time. It's not solving the problem. Experienced ministers expedite change, and they strengthen churches. Denominational leaders must train and deploy interim shepherds. Build the pipeline. Churches have to proactively raise up leaders from within their own communities. There are different certifications and training programs that build essential practical ministry knowledge. This is bypassing seminary. Seminary is, the MDiv degree, which is required, I have the MDiv, and it's required by a lot of denominations. They actually require that as a prerequisite. Full-time, I'm talking full-time, it's a 4-year program. So you have 4 years of undergraduate, tack on another 4 years of seminary, and then they tack on a couple years. They have to, a lot of denominations do ordinations. That ordination takes years. So you're talking, 12 years in by this point? Roughly 12 years in before you're even qualified to preach. How long was Jesus, just a pop quiz, how long was Jesus' ministry? 3. See, we've choked out the ability to effectively disciple people. And young people are like, I don't want to give up 12 years of my life. I look back and I'm like, I don't know if I would do it again. I asked myself that, and I'm like, I don't really know, because it's like you just change the older you get. But I'm like, it took me 9 years to get through, both undergraduate and grad, with a year off in between, so 10 years. I took a year off and drove truck. 10 years, a decade. It's not an effective way to disciple people for ministry. So they have certification programs, and that's what Sam's saying. Look to some of the certifications. It's a much easier way. Develop new sustainable models for ongoing leadership development and calling. Accessible online certification is vital for bivocational and interim ministry roles. Flexible staffing models are starting to emerge. Flexibility manages the aging pastorate problem wisely. We got to be flexible. Churches typically are inflexible, and what happens to some, picture, let's take a PVC pipe, just for funsies. If that PVC pipe becomes brittle and inflexible, what happens as soon as pressure is applied to it? Yeah, it splits, it shatters, breaks into pieces. Flexibility manages that problem pretty wisely. We've got to be more flexible. Seasoned ministers can continue ministry in flexible roles. New staffing models emerge to multiply that impact. Creative arrangements, these are all Sam's points, not mine. Creative arrangements extend the ministry life of older leaders. So instead of just having people retire and they're done, you say, okay, what about, could you serve as in an interim role while we get serious about discipling some of our younger people. And it's like you have to have some kind of flexibility. This is another step that Sam says we can be preparing our churches. Now, we ought to be preparing. I blinked, and I've been here 17 years. Like, I literally blinked. Like, 17 years is a long time. I look young, like Terry. Where'd Terry go? Did he sneak out? He knew I was going to talk about him. But, it's something that we need, all churches need to prepare for this. You evaluate your internal leadership disciple pipeline. You create more flexibility in the church staffing models. Utilize experienced ministers to mentor the next generation. And this proactively planning allows the church to thrive in the future. And so many churches are not doing this. They wait until their ministers age out. And it's denying the elephant in the room. Like, I've seen so many churches do this where they're holding on, and they're like, well, so-and-so's been here for 47 years or whatever, and they just take that for granted. And then one day that person says, I don't know how it worked with your dad, Brent, but did he end up retiring?
He just got where he couldn't do anything anymore.
So his illness took over. Was the church prepared?
Well, that church was a little unusual. They had like 3 ministers, and they were very small congregations. So I think
Yeah.
they had like 20% of their congregation was preachers.
Yeah, so 20% of the congregation was preached. That's very rare, especially today. That's just, but that's pretty unheard of today. So typically what happens is something like that where somebody gets sicker and sicker, or they just reach the point where they've kind of cashed in.
How classified their congregation was that they had 3 ministers who were in that retired state where they were just taking turns preaching at the congregation.
Yeah, so they had three people in the retirement zone, and they just took turns back and forth. But again, it's incredibly rare. So typically what's happening is they push the envelope as far as they can push it, and then retirement happens, and then they're scrambling for the next 3 years. And so I've been on a lot of church websites where they're like, we're listening for the sermon time, we'll listen to somebody else's online sermon. Like, they still meet in person, so it's a hybrid model where they're piping in another minister and watching it on the screen. And so it's flexibility, but it's not ideal. I don't know. It's possible. It's possible that somebody's watching me. But it's getting very interesting. So Sam's like, you got to prepare now. You proactively plan, and that allows the church to thrive in the future. That was my last slide there. So it's kind of like planning for our death. Like, unfortunately, what happened to Travis Beard, and that's life. Like, Natalie and I, my kids are not here, so I can talk about this. We had a conversation right after that. And every time we lose a friend that's in our age group, we have these conversations, and we're like, okay, are we prepared? Natalie said, what do I do? She didn't say if. Now, I don't know if she has plans. Like, I'm not really sure what's going on in her mind, but she's like, what do I do when you die? Like, let's talk through this. And it wasn't emotional, and it wasn't like we didn't get all worked up, but I just said, here's what I want. Here's what I envision when I'm gone. I envision, and I'll say this because I'll plug this for everybody. I have a very healthy life insurance policy. I plan for my exit from this earth because I don't know when it's going to happen. And I will not leave my family with a big fat question mark trying to figure out how they're going to make it. We have wills, right? We plan for our exit. And it's not emotional, and it's like we don't get all worked up and we don't get into arguments. We categorically say, at some point, one of us will exit this earth and move into eternity. And how do we plan now for that so that we're not trying to figure it out in the middle of an extreme tragedy? And so ministry is a lot like that, where we've got to be planning, we've got to be having these conversations, because it is going to happen at every church that's ever existed in humanity. It happens. And so Sam is right. Proactively planning figures, you're basically figuring out, how do I carry on that legacy, or how do we collectively carry on that legacy and continue so that we don't fizzle out? So I love this, and I really connected with this because it is like, I see such, I don't know if problem is the right word, but it's a problem. I have so many friends who their churches have closed their doors. They've gone through that process of laying a church to rest. Like, they use kind of soft language to basically say, our church died. I've got, excuse me, I don't know how you have allergies in December, but we all do in our family. But I've got multiple friends who they've gone through that process, and I would say about 85% of them were trying to wing that process like as they were going through it. And there were about a quarter of them who were very planned. They knew. They're like, at some point the church will close its doors. And so they were already connected to other ministries that help churches close their doors. But I'd rather not go through that process, right? I'd rather see a church go on and thrive for the next 100 years or so. So anyway, just a lot of food for thought that Sam has here.